Paris was burning, not with flames, but with the relentless weight of a summer that refused to end. For weeks, the air had felt heavy, almost cruel, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Streets that usually danced with the chatter of tourists were empty now, the stone facades of centuries-old buildings shimmering under a heat wave so fierce it seemed to have pushed the world indoors. Even the Louvre, home to centuries of beauty and history, felt strangely lifeless. That silence would prove to be the perfect cover. On this particular Sunday, while the last handful of visitors lingered in the cool marble halls, one man was already in position. He didn't arrive in a rush or skulk in shadows. He walked in calmly, dressed in crisp white overalls identical to the ones worn by Louvre staff. He didn't just look like he belonged. He moved like he'd worked there for years, and that was exactly the point. The tourists slowly drifted out into the suffocating Parisian heat, the grand glass pyramid entrance gleaming under the fading sun. Behind them, the man disappeared into a narrow hallway, slipped into a tiny storage closet, and closed the door without a sound. The hinges didn't creak. The latch didn't click. Just darkness and the sound of his own breathing. He waited. Hours passed. The museum grew still, the sound of his heartbeat filling the small space. Somewhere beyond the walls, night settled over Paris. The hum of the air grew softer. The smell of old stone and polished wood filled the air. He barely moved, conserving his energy. Tomorrow was the day, Monday, when the Louvre was closed to the public. No tourists, no bustling guides, only a skeleton crew of workers, most of whom would be far away from the Salon Care, the gallery he was after. At exactly 7:15 the next morning, he stepped out. The Louvre was nearly deserted, its galleries bathed in pale morning light. His footsteps were muffled by thick carpets as he made his way toward a particular painting, one that, while respected, was not yet the global celebrity it would become. The Mona Lisa. She hung there quietly, her mysterious smile seeming to welcome him, as if she already knew what was about to happen. Back then, she didn't have her own guarded room or layers of bulletproof glass. She was mounted with simple metal pins, and he wasted no time lifting the frame from the wall. The heist had begun. He carried the painting into a nearby stairwell where shadows wrapped around him like allies. From his pocket, he produced a screwdriver, methodically loosening the screws that held the frame. The air was warm, still. His hands were steady. He removed the painting from its protective case, one he knew well because he had built it himself during his time as a handyman at the Louvre. Then he wrapped the masterpiece in a plain white sheet, making it look like nothing more than a bundle of supplies. The exit was close. He moved quickly, confidence in every step, until the heavy door in front of him refused to budge. Locked. For the first time, a flicker of risk entered the equation. But fate has a strange sense of humor. At that exact moment, a plumber appeared, tools in hand, working on routine maintenance. He glanced at the man in the white overalls and assumed he was just another museum employee. Without hesitation, the plumber helped him open the door. And then, just like that, he was gone. No alarms, no shouts, no frantic chases through cobblestone streets. The Mona Lisa slipped out of the Louvre in the arms of a man who blended perfectly into the world around him. By the time Paris awoke to another stifling day, she was already hidden in a trunk with a false bottom just 2 miles away. The heist itself had taken minutes. The realization of what had happened would take far, far longer. For nearly 28 hours, no one noticed she was missing. That week, the museum had been running a photography project, temporarily removing paintings for official archival shots. Blank spaces on walls were common, and no one gave the empty spot in the Salon Care a second thought. But when the photographers returned the following day without the Mona Lisa in their possession, the truth began to sink in. Something had gone terribly wrong. The painting was gone. The Louvre's quiet halls erupted into chaos. Detectives swarmed the museum, taking photographs, questioning employees, tracing every possible escape route. The French authorities didn't treat this as just another theft. They treated it as a national emergency. Borders were tightened. Ports and train stations buzzed with new orders. The city seemed to hold its breath again, but this time for an entirely different reason. And yet, in those first frantic hours, all they had to go on was a discarded wooden frame and a single fingerprint. That fingerprint, they would later discover, would become one of the strangest twists in the entire case. Newspapers across the globe turned the theft into front-page drama. Paris offered a staggering reward, $250,000 for any information that could bring the Mona Lisa home. The public responded in droves. Letters flooded police stations, tips poured in from every corner of the globe, and wild theories began to bloom. Some swore they had seen a man leaving the Louvre with something bulky under his arm. Others claimed the Mona Lisa had already been smuggled onto a train heading through Belgium. There were even whispers of a ship carrying her across the Atlantic to America. But the most sensational rumor involved a name the art world knew all too well: Pablo Picasso. The story went that a secretary, familiar with the famous artist, confessed to police that Picasso had once acquired stolen artifacts from the Louvre, specifically Iberian statues. These were real thefts, confirmed by serial numbers, and it was true Picasso had used similar forms in his paintings. The connection was tantalizing, and the police pounced. Picasso was questioned under the weight of suspicion, but the case against him began to crumble almost as soon as it was built. If not Picasso, then perhaps another giant of wealth and influence, American banker and art collector J.P. Morgan. Some believed Morgan had commissioned the theft himself, arranging for the Mona Lisa to be shipped directly to his collection. Police even searched a ship arriving in New York, convinced she might be on board. She wasn't. Weeks turned to months. Leads turned to dead ends. The Mona Lisa had vanished into thin air, and the world was obsessed. People lined up at the Louvre just to stare at the empty space where she had once hung, as though the absence itself had become art. What no one knew was that she had never left Paris. She was right there, hidden away in a cramped apartment belonging to the very man who had carried her out in broad daylight. His name was Vincenzo Peruggia, a 29-year-old Italian who had once been part of the Louvre's maintenance crew. He knew its corridors like the veins in his own hand, knew when it was quietest, knew where the guards rarely looked. He even knew the quirks of its security, like the fact that the museum was closed on Mondays, giving him time to make his escape. Inside his apartment, the Mona Lisa lay concealed inside a custom-built trunk, its false bottom making it invisible to anyone who might search the room. And police did search, twice. But with only his right-hand fingerprints on file, and the one left at the crime scene belonging to his left hand, they never connected him to the theft. The painting was literally under their noses, and they never saw it. Peruggia had pulled off one of the simplest yet boldest heists in history, and for nearly 2 years, it seemed like he might just get away with it. But greed, or perhaps pride, began to gnaw at him. He didn't want to sell the Mona Lisa, at least not in the conventional sense. He wanted to return her to Italy, or so he claimed, and that decision would prove to be his undoing. The letter was short, written in careful, deliberate script. It carried no return address, no fingerprints, only a single name signed at the bottom: Leonardo. In it, the writer claimed to possess the Mona Lisa and expressed a desire to return her to her true home in Italy. There was no hint of panic in the words, no bargaining for ransom, just the air of a man who thought he was doing something noble, even historic. The recipient of that letter was an art dealer in Florence. He had handled his share of eccentric clients, but the audacity of this one was unmatched. It was one thing for someone to boast about owning a stolen painting in hushed tones over wine. It was another to declare outright that they were holding one of the most famous works of Leonardo da Vinci. Still, the dealer played it cool, agreeing to meet the mysterious Leonardo in person. When the train from Paris pulled into Florence, Vincenzo Peruggia stepped off, dressed neatly but plainly. He carried himself with an odd mixture of pride and secrecy, a man about to unveil a treasure to its rightful keepers, or so he imagined. He booked himself into a modest hotel, the kind where the rooms smelled faintly of old wood and the hallways echoed with footsteps. The dealer and his associate arrived at the hotel later that afternoon. They greeted him cordially, masking the anticipation that surged beneath their polite expressions. Once inside his small, dimly lit room, Peruggia wasted no time. He knelt beside a large trunk at the foot of his bed, the kind that might hold a traveling salesman's wares, and undid its brass latches. When the lid creaked open, there it was, the Mona Lisa, wrapped in protective cloth, its frame removed, but its surface as pristine as the day it was lifted from the wall in Paris. The two men leaned in close, the air suddenly charged. They weren't experts in forgery, but even to their eyes, there was no question. this was the real thing. They spoke in low voices, agreeing that the painting should be examined more closely in their studio for authentication. Perugia hesitated for a moment, but their assurances that he would be rewarded and recognized for bringing her home seemed to calm him. He let them take it. It was the last time he would see her as a free man. Within the hour, police stormed his hotel room. The dealers had gone straight to the authorities, and in that brief moment of trust, he had handed them all they needed. Perugia was arrested without resistance. News traveled fast, across Florence, across Italy, across the world. After 2 years of mystery, the Mona Lisa had been found. In the courtroom, the narrative painted Perugia as a misguided patriot. He insisted he had stolen the painting not for personal gain, but to restore a piece of Italian heritage. It was, in his mind, an act of national pride. The court didn't buy the romanticism, but neither did they treat him as a hardened criminal. He served only 7 months in prison before walking free. In Italy, he was something of a curiosity, half condemned, half admired. He died just a decade later, taking with him the intimate details of his plan, or so people thought. For years, the public accepted the story at face value. A lone Italian handyman with knowledge of the Louvre's workings had simply walked in, taken the Mona Lisa, and hidden her away. It was bold, yes, but straightforward. Then, in 1932, 2 decades after the theft, a journalist named Karl Decker claimed the truth was far more complex and far more cunning. Decker's account began not in Paris, but in Buenos Aires, where he claimed to have met a man named Eduardo de Valfierno. Valfierno was no common thief. He was a smooth-talking con artist with a taste for the long game. He wasn't interested in stealing the Mona Lisa for himself. What he wanted was far more profitable: to sell perfect forgeries of it to wealthy collectors who believed they were buying the genuine article. The plan was meticulous. Valfierno commissioned a highly skilled French painter to create 6 flawless replicas. These weren't crude copies. They were so exact, down to the brushstrokes and the aging of the varnish, that even seasoned experts would be fooled. Once the fakes were completed, they were shipped to America and stored away, waiting for their moment to enter the market. But the success of the con depended on one crucial detail. The real Mona Lisa had to disappear. Without the theft, there would always be the nagging possibility that a collector might compare their painting to the original hanging in the Louvre. The theft would remove that doubt entirely. This was where Perugia came in. Valfierno needed someone with access, someone who knew the Louvre's routines and weaknesses, someone who could take the real painting without drawing immediate suspicion. Perugia was perfect. Whether he believed Valfierno's patriotic justification or simply saw an opportunity is unclear, but he agreed. Once the Mona Lisa was reported stolen, Valfierno quietly set his plan in motion. One by one, each replica was sold to a different wealthy American collector, each believing they had secured the most famous painting in history. Because none of these buyers knew of the others, and because the original was nowhere to be found, there was no reason for them to doubt their good fortune. The sales were conducted in secrecy, under the pretense of absolute discretion, which only fueled the illusion of authenticity. By the time the real Mona Lisa was recovered in Florence, the damage and the payday had already been done. The 6 fakes were out in the world, hidden away in private collections, their owners perhaps still convinced to this day that they hold the true masterpiece. The actual Mona Lisa returned to the Louvre, her fame now cemented by the drama of her disappearance. For the French public, she had been a beloved work of art before the theft. Afterward, she became something else entirely, a symbol of intrigue, of national pride, of the fragility and resilience of beauty. Crowds flocked to see her, more than ever before. What had once been a quiet painting with a subtle smile was now the most famous face on earth. Valfierno, if Decker's story is to be believed, never faced justice. He vanished into the haze of history, perhaps living out his days on the profits of one of the most ingenious cons ever executed. The truth of his involvement has never been definitively proven, and some dismiss Decker's account as an embellishment. But whether entirely true or partly myth, the story adds a layer of mystery that refuses to fade. What is certain is this: the Mona Lisa's theft transformed her from an admired Renaissance portrait into a global icon. The painting that once hung modestly among others in the Salon Care now sat behind bulletproof glass, watched by security cameras, guarded as fiercely as any crown jewel. And somewhere, scattered across the world, there may still be those 6 forgeries, hidden in private estates, passed down through generations, their owners either blissfully ignorant or quietly aware of the truth. They are the ghosts of that summer in Paris, each one a silent echo of the day a man in white overalls walked out of the Louvre with the most famous smile in history tucked under his arm. The Louvre has never quite shaken the shadow of that theft. Even now, over a century later, security teams study the Perugia case as both a cautionary tale and a reminder that sometimes the most audacious crimes aren't the ones done with brute force, but with patience, precision, and a willingness to vanish into the crowd. Some say Perugia was a fool for giving himself away. Others say he was a patriot betrayed by his own sense of honor. But the whispers that follow the Valfierno story carry a different conclusion, that Perugia was never truly the mastermind at all, but a single piece in a game far larger than he ever imagined. And somewhere out there, whether in a quiet Florentine workshop, a Buenos Aires hideout, or a gilded American study, there are those who still know exactly how that game was played and who profited from it most. In the decades that followed, the Mona Lisa returned to her place on the wall, but she was no longer just a painting. She was a survivor. The glass case that now protected her wasn't simply for preservation. It was a barrier between her and the endless human desire to possess her. Tourists came in droves, elbowing through crowds for the briefest glimpse, their phones raised like offerings. She had become untouchable, a celebrity in oil and wood. But deep inside the art world, whispers refused to die. Some claimed that the Mona Lisa in the Louvre wasn't the real one at all. The theory went like this. When Perugia brought the painting to Florence, the dealers who examined it may have switched it with a perfect forgery before calling the police. The real Mona Lisa, they said, never went back to Paris. It was an intoxicating thought, one that could destroy the credibility of the world's most famous museum if proven true. And while official experts scoffed, others pointed to odd details, faint differences in the shading of her smile, inconsistencies in brushwork, minute cracks in the varnish that didn't match early photographs. The Louvre dismissed these claims, but they lingered in the shadows like a rumor you can't quite ignore. Then, in the late 1970s, an elderly American businessman passed away in New York, leaving behind a vast estate. Among his possessions was a temperature-controlled vault no one had opened in decades. When the executor of the will turned the key, the air that escaped was cold and stale, and inside, wrapped in linen and sealed in a wooden crate, was a painting. Not just any painting. The Mona Lisa. Experts were summoned in secrecy. Under harsh lights, they examined the piece with trembling hands. Every detail, the pigment, the panel, the underdrawing, matched Leonardo's original techniques. But this Mona Lisa was different. She was cleaner, less yellowed by centuries of exposure. Some details, like the background landscape, appeared sharper than in the Louvre's version. If this was a forgery, it was flawless. If it was the real one, then what, exactly, had been hanging in the Louvre for the past 60 years? The find was buried quietly. The painting was whisked away into private custody before the public could ever know. Officially, nothing had happened. But unofficially, the discovery set off a storm in underground art circles. Rumors spread that the 6 forgeries Valfierno had commissioned weren't all sold to collectors. At least one was kept, hidden, waiting for the day it could be revealed. And here's where the story turns from curiosity to danger. In 1983, a man named André Lemaire, a Parisian journalist obsessed with the Mona Lisa theft, claimed to have tracked down one of Valfierno's surviving associates in South America. He told colleagues he had proof that the Louvre's Mona Lisa was not the real one, and that he intended to publish it. Days before the story was set to run, Lemaire was found dead in his apartment. The official cause was ruled a heart attack, but his friends swore he'd been in perfect health. His notes on the case vanished. The trail went cold again, until 2009, when infrared scans of the Louvre's Mona Lisa revealed something unsettling. Beneath the surface painting was an entirely different version of the portrait, subtly altered, with changes in posture and gaze. Some experts chalked it up to Leonardo's revisions during the creative process. Others, whispering in backrooms and closed conferences, wondered if it was evidence of an overpainting done to match a forgery. The Louvre denied any doubt, of course. Their Mona Lisa was the Mona Lisa. But the rumors, the rumors had taken on a life of their own. Somewhere, perhaps locked in a vault, perhaps hanging quietly in a billionaire's private study, the true Mona Lisa may still be smiling, her eyes following whoever dares to stand before her. If Valfierno's plan truly played out to its fullest, then the most famous heist in history didn't just succeed. It may still be succeeding to this day. And here's the most chilling part. Every so often, an anonymous invitation surfaces in the hands of the ultra-rich. A simple card, embossed in gold, bearing nothing but a date, a city, and the words, "An evening with Lisa." The attendees, always sworn to secrecy, are said to be escorted into an undisclosed location where the real Mona Lisa is revealed just for them, before vanishing back into the shadows. If those whispers are true, then the most valuable painting in the world isn't in the Louvre at all. She's a ghost, slipping between continents, adored by those who can afford the price of the secret. And perhaps the most unnerving truth? The woman behind that smile might be looking at you right now, from a wall you've never seen, in a room you'll never enter, reminding the world that the greatest art heist in history might still be unfinished.